Alright, now to do the Ceruledge PRs. All the information about Armourouge PR, or PRs in general, in the Armourouge video, so I'll just get right to it. This is Truth doing the PRs, and yeah, I'll try and keep this one a bit shorter because the Armourouge PRs went a little bit longer than I would have liked. But that's alright. That is alright. So the first team we've got here is Rider, and again, I've just got this tier list here with everyone's icons. So I'll just be slotting people in sort of like wherever generally, and then at the end going back through the teams and sort of ordering them if I haven't already done so. So there's the 9 teams here. My own team is missing an icon, but at the end I'll be bringing together a couple opinions from other members of the server. I don't really know why James the Cat's icon is here. I think it just got left over from the Armourouge tier list, but welcome to Ceruledge as well, James. So yeah, first team to look at is Rider's team. Now the first thing to sort of, I guess, address with this team is that a number of trades were made. So originally this team had a Mega Gardevoir and a Mega Venusaur. So 31 points were spent on Megas, which is very excessive. And I assume Rider just sort of did that with trades in mind anyway. Overall, I think the trades have really benefited the team. I think that Rider's team would definitely have gone like probably down here pre-trades. There were like a lot of things I wasn't massively keen on. But I think that the trades made a lot of sense. So the first one was Megguard to Sylveon, which I think, like at least just looking at these 4, and I'll get it up on the prep doc, sorry. Just on the right hand side here. So yeah, I think Sylveon, especially with like this core here, which is pretty bulky, Sylveon just fits like a lot better maybe than Mega Guard. I think Mega Guard's like special attack is probably a bit more appreciated. But overall I think I like the Sylveon pick, and obviously you're not doubling up on Megas that way too. Rider also got rid of Espeon for Zebstrika, which is fair enough. It should be a Terra Captain here, I haven't highlighted it, my apologies there. Got rid of Rabska for Araquanid, which I think is a fantastic trade. I think Araquanid's really underrated. Also goes kind of well with the speed tiers present in the higher tier picks. And finally, Lucario got turned into Aegislash, which I think is a massive upgrade. Aegislash is great, I also don't really rate Lucario. Yeah, so the first thing I guess with this team, other than the trades, is that the speed tiers are alright. You know, you've got Zebstrika and Arceus towards the top. But like I guess if you're looking at like the higher tier picks, Garchomp's the fastest at base 102, which isn't particularly incredible. Opponents will still probably have to worry about the fact that, you know, Arceus and Zebstrika exist, especially given their Terra Captains and Z Captains, respectively. Overall, like the rest of the team doesn't really have too many speed gaps, so it's like not too bad down here. It's just more, I think there'll be a lot of opponents where Rider finds that, you know, their top guys are getting outsped relatively frequently. But there are webs to sort of circumnavigate that. The other thing I'd like to mention before looking at the type charts is just the Z Captains and the Terra Captains. I'll go to this view so it's better, just easier to look at. Yeah, and from what I can tell, yeah, so these are, yeah, the Terra Captains here, so Porygon Z, Zebstrika, and Probopass. Probo's good, always has been. Probably shouldn't even be 2 points, probably should be 3. Zebstrika I kind of like because it can abuse Terra Blast to make a bit better use of its attack stat, which is nice. Definitely appreciates that. You can still run special Zebstrika if you want, but it just gives it more options, which is cool. And then as well, Porygon Z I think is quite cool with Terra, with the adaptability boosts and all that. It doesn't really miss losing the adaptability boost on Tri-Attack. Like how maybe like a Terra Crawdaunt would miss its stab moves, for example. So I think Porygon Z could be quite a threat there. Z Sylveon is sort of just alright. this is yet another team that has a Garchomp that doesn't Z-Captain it, which does make me a little bit sad. Because I think that would come significantly more often than the Sylveon. The Z Crystal and the Sylveon, rather. In terms of the type chart, it actually looks like quite nice. There's a lot of resists for everything, outside of maybe like Ghost and Dark, but even then, it's not too shabby. You can make an argument for maybe like Ghost is a bit of a worry just because Porygon Z is a Terra Captain, but outside of that, yeah, it's quite a pleasing type chart to look at. So yeah, right now I've only sort of like addressed like my concerns with like the speed tiers, maybe like damage profile as well a bit, because your special attackers are mainly tanks, though Aegis Slash could pick up the slack if necessary. So could Porygon Z. Where this team maybe doesn't rate as highly is sort of its hazard control. I think its Stealth Rock options are alright. Garchomp's always great. The other two options aren't going to be coming as much. Webs is nice on this team, like I mentioned. But yeah, the defog options really aren't good. I think maybe you could argue that it's passable if Rotom was a Terra Captain. But remaining as an Electric Ice Rotom as your best defogger isn't great. And Arceus, you don't want to be running defog on pretty much like ever. So I do worry for Rider in that aspect, and I think it's going to be something that it's going to be really tricky to navigate. Because it's all well and good to have like a really good type profile, and you know you've got a lot of bulky members as well that can sort of slow down matches, chip away at the opponents. But if you're having to deal with hazards and the opponent isn't particularly having to deal with it, it just becomes a lot harder to stay on that game plan. And conversely, there's not as much, say, like explosive power on this team to where Rider could just pivot to like a hyper offense playstyle. So I do think that could make things really tricky. Outside of that, the momentum is okay as well. Like Urshifu is obviously great with U-turn, but a lot of the other like sort of top guys on Rider's team aren't really pivoting out too much. You've got Baton Pass on Sylveon, which is alright, but outside of that, I don't think it's like super amazing. So, like I said, I really do like the trades. I think they were really smart. The old Terra and Z captains, or rather, I like the new Terra and Z captains more than the old ones, but I still would have liked to see Z Garchomp. And I think that the yeah, just sort of like some issues with speed and then hazards are really going to make this a trickier prospect for Rider than perhaps he would like. I'm going to tentatively put the team here for now. I could also see it being up here. I'll tentatively put it in C for now, because I still, like I've mentioned the flaws, but I also think that it's just got some really solid, like especially the top 4 that I'm looking at. I guess move Aegis Slash up there as well as like sort of like a top 5 in terms of points. I think they're just all really solid mons. They've all been on sort of victorious draft teams, or draft teams that have gotten, you know, semi-finals in the past. They've always been really good whenever they've been chosen. So I definitely think Rider could definitely utilize those top picks, plus like say Porygon Z or another guest member to, you know, to good effect. Next team is Banjo and Sylveon. I'll just move it over here. Don't believe any trades were made from that team. Nope. So yeah, where are we? There we are. So yeah, this team's speed tiers I feel like are quite solid. You could make the argument that maybe you would like something between Mamo and Palafin, but overall it's not the end of the world. You know, maybe it's a bit excessive to have 3 base 80 Pokemon, but like, end of the day, it's like a small gap. I think it's fine. This team in Ceruledge mimicked Connor and Cheese's Terra captains as well, with both teams choosing Terra Jolteon and Terra Hitmontop, which is quite amusing. I think Terra Jolteon's great. I really like that pick. I'm glad both the teams chose to Terra Jolteon, as I think it's one of the best beneficiaries of us allowing Terra Blast now. Hitmontop as a secondary Terra is fine as well. And I think, yeah, like they could have Terra Delmise. It's probably also fine. Like they're both rapid spinners, right? Probably would achieve a similar-ish goal, but I think Terra Hitmontop's probably a bit better. Maybe just for like offensive options as well. So I do like the Terra captains. The Z captain with Iron Moth I think is quite strong. I think it's always difficult to prep for because you always have to consider that the Moth might not be running a booster. It could just nuke you. It kind of gives the Moth an additional playstyle that it only sometimes would otherwise have. So I think that's a good choice as well. Yeah, regarding the team, like type matchup wise, it's not too shabby. I think there's again like a few. It's limited in its resists, but the resists do exist. I think mainly where I worry about this team's defensive profile is just that majority of the picks are quite squishy. They don't have too much bulk to them, even if like you consider maybe like Shed Tail support and things like that. Which this team, in fairness, is sort of, you know, it's offensively minded. It's built to sort of make use of those Shed Tails. It still does concern me a bit. I think that in quite a few battles, I wouldn't be shocked to just see like a Pokemon or two randomly drop to a stray hit or a couple stray hits, where other teams might have the bulk to not have to worry about that issue too much. Skarmory's really solid in terms of shoring up that defensive core, but outside of Skarmory, I'm not too convinced that the rest of the team can appropriately slow the game down. Offensively, I mean, it's quite strong. You know, Jolteon's pretty decent, fast sort of sweeper-esque mon. You've got Zmoth, like I said. Mega Absol's always quite strong, even if it has had mixed results in the league so far. Mamo and Palafin as well, they've always been really, really good choices, and I think the double priority from both of them is going to prove really annoying for opponents to deal with. Even things like Gardevoir as well, I can see sort of making an appearance or two and just using its special wall-breaking prowess to catch a few opponents off guard. In terms of hazards, it's quite solid. Skarmory's always fantastic at that. You've got the secondary option with Mamo, which I think is great. 2 T-Spikes options. You know, they might not be seen too much, but you've got the option to T-Spike if the matchup calls for it. 1 Defogger's maybe a little bit sketchy, but 3 Rapid Spinners is more than enough to sort of make up for that 1 Defogger. So I'm not really too concerned about that. Pivot-wise, there's options. I think that, you know, Shed Tail, U-Turn, both adequate for Cyclizar. Realistically, I don't know how much baton passing is going to be done by these guys. It's mainly going to be Jolteon U-Turn, Palafin Flip Turn, maybe, if it's not a setup variant. And then all the pivots really coming from Cyclizar. Maybe the occasional U-Turn Moth too, which it's okay, but I think with, you know, heavy hitters like Moth, like Mamo, like Mega Absol, you would like a bit more pivot around. You know, in a sense, maybe like a Corviknight would have been a better fit for this team than say like a Skarmory, although you would lose access to a couple of those hazards, and you know the points would, you know, they would have to sacrifice a mon as well, point wise. Yeah, I mean, this team, I think it has, like I said, good offensive options. It's just like the main thing I worry about is just the frailty of it. I do think that it might not have enough longevity to punch the holes in the opponent's teams that it might otherwise strive to do. And I think it might get taken advantage of in that sense. Especially when, like, you know, there's a very real chance that, like, you know, you look at these sort of like top 7, they're arguably the best 7 Mons. It's definitely very possible that only like 1 defensive Pokemon in Skarmory, maybe like 2 max, gets brought to each battle. And I think if an opponent has something that can just overwhelm 1 or 2 of the defensive answers, then all of a sudden the rest of the offensive guys might just get dropped by a strong Scarfer, or, you know, a banded Mon that comes in off of a team with a lot of momentum. I think I'll also put it around here for now, the team. I'm not sure. I think I might put it above Riders, just because I think that it's like, sort of when evaluating these teams that are on like similar, like when I'm worried about certain flaws, like sort of just taking control of a match and not allowing a team to shine, I kind of value ones that can utilize their offensive presence more, whereas I think Riders is maybe a bit more defensive. Sylveon and Banjo's team, I think, can make potentially more upsets happen just by virtue of things like Cyclizar, of things like ZI and Moth, or, you know, even Jolteon getting a couple kills, benefiting from Terra Blast. So I think that's important to consider as well. Next up is Me2 Pink. Their symbol's just this one from, like, I don't know, Season 9, where they had a roaring moon, so please update your logo when you can so that I'm not having to use very old stuff. Obviously, I'm pretty sure the entire nation of America knows that Me2 Pink got sniped with the Mega Scizor pick, and I guess the Mega Zam pick as well. Sorry about that, guys. Not really. Their backup was Darkrai though, which I think is like, you know, if you, in terms of what you're trying to do, Mega Zam, Darkrai, they're like pretty similar. So it's a smart backup in that sense. They traded away Gerda for Primeape, which I think is a good trade. I rate Primeape, but I don't know if I like it as much of a trade because Primeape didn't become a Terra Captain. I do think that Terra Primeape is pretty strong, honestly, especially with access to Rage Fist. You can Terra Ghost Rage Fist if you want, or just become some sort of defensive typing. Also quite beneficial. But in terms of the captains, you know, Terra Knacklestack, Terra Crocodile, I mean, how many times are we going to see it in Sword Draft League? Probably another like 5 seasons of this before Terra somehow gets removed. Terra Orthworm, I'm not like sold on. I'll just say for these PRs, I have watched like the replays that have happened so far. Just sort of by virtue of either having to watch it to sort of know what my own opponent's doing, or just inputting the data into the spreadsheet. So I did see Me2 Pink brought like a Terra Fairy Orthworm, and it was actually quite tanky. So fair enough. Maybe I'm just a hater. Maybe it's better than I think. I'm not sure that it's like an amazing pick. But in saying that, like, I don't really. I guess they could have gone like what, Terra Screamtail plus only one of Knackle and Croc. But I don't think that's like. I don't think Terra Screamtail's like that crazy either, really. Z Zygarde's cool though. I like that. I think it's good. You could go Z Terrapagos if you wanted to, but like, I think I more so like the physical attacker having the Z in this sense, because there are already like a lot of strong either special attackers or tanky special attackers on this team. It's really only Mega Bayonet making up the physical damage, which I think is a bit of a concern, this team's damage profile, especially if Bayonet doesn't show up. So yeah, Z Zygarde makes sense. In terms of type matchups, there's definitely, so just eyeballing it here, there's a few to be concerned about. You know, there's limited switch-ins to some types. Electric's a weird one. I feel like I don't often see just that few electric resists. So it's a bit of a uniqueness about this team. I do worry that, like, you know, there's quite a few Terra Blast Electrics running around that are really speedy. You've got this Jolteon, Electrode, Hisui, probably I think regular Electrode might be as well. I think that Me2 and Pink will have their work cut out for them against those sort of matchups, which I worry about. You know, water and fighting as well, relatively common types, though Screamtail kind of has it locked down in terms of the fighting stuff. Actually, I don't think fighting's too much to worry about, in all honesty. It's more so just that electric profile and against opposing terrors. I do like the speed tiers though. They're just well spread out. I think Crobat's solid. I think between 111 and 95 is chill as well. Yeah, I'm just not like super sold. Like on, yeah, the Terra Captains. Again, I'm maybe an Orthworm hater, like Kivs. And then Knuckle and Croc are obviously strong. We've seen it every season, but with each passing season, I feel like they become weaker just by virtue of more people knowing how to play against them, as well as just this is Terra Blast season as well, and they're not really going to be strong Terra Blasters. So there is that. They have a lot of Stealth Rocks. Definitely cannot hate on them for that. And I think their removal option, I mean, these three are some of the strongest removalists in the draft, I feel like. So I think that is quite solid in terms of hazard control. Cleric-wise, you know, Wish on Screamtail's great. I think wishing into Zygarde's quite helpful. Terrapagos with a Wisher is, in my opinion, how you should be drafting it as well. And you can make the same sort of arguments for, you know, the Terra Captains down here. Wish support's nice. They don't have massive base HP, so Screamtail's always going to be able to top them up pretty much to full. I do feel like having some sort of heal bell would have been nice, just even only for the Zygarde. Just in case something happens, because if you're only physical damage in a match is Zygarde and then it gets burnt, that would be kind of shit. So that is, I guess, one thing I'd sort of call out there. Same with Momentum. It's a little bit not as great, but I don't like, outside of Darkrai though, there's not really too many guys on this team that like you're trying to use a momentum move and then get off like a massive Specs or Banded hit, so I don't think it's like too bad. And a lot of the Pokemon are pretty self-sufficient. You know, Screamtail, Crobat, Rotom can sit in front of the opponent for, you know, multiple turns in a row, so it's not the end of the world there. Yeah, I think this team's like solidly somewhere in here. With like only being able to rate 9 teams, I think this is going to look like a pretty small tier list, so like fair enough. I think the team is solid. I'm a bit worried about its offenses though, and yeah, like I mentioned, like a couple of those typings on opponents might be tricky to deal with. Yeah, moving on to the next lot. Alright, so if I'm not mistaken, this is Karp and Bagel's team. Every single Pokemon has some sort of aversion or resistance to fighting, which I think is interesting. I thought that was like the first time I've ever seen it in a draft, and then I looked at my own team, and Pingu and I literally have the exact same phenomenon happening. Yeah, in terms of what this team's got, again, I don't believe any trades were done. They've drafted Kyurem B. I never really thought, after, you know, Karp saying that Kyurem B has like its nuts chopped off, that they would ever draft it, but here we are, first pick and all. And I think there's like a decent team solidly built around it. I like Mega Lop plus Kyurem B. I think that seems like a decent pairing. Just sort of, just seems like it would be. In terms of the captains, I think Z Colossal, Z Registeel are quite strong. There's like 3 Regis that are Terra captains in this division, which maybe that's something to look into. But I do think that, like, even though Steel is a great typing, just having a Registeel boost up over and over and then become a water type or something just seems infuriating. And Colossal's always been pretty solid Terra Captain too. I do like Z Thundurus. I think it's probably the best choice here. You know, you could make an argument for Z Petarant or even Terra Petarant, but I think where the captaincies have gone for this team are correct. Speed tiers seem solid. I do really like Whimsicott just in general. Connor and Cheese have it as well. I just think it's a really solid mon. Starmie too, I'm very curious to see how that goes. It's not been drafted, at least for like a couple years, but maybe ever. So very curious to see how that goes. There's like a couple types that could be a bit scary for Karp and Bagels, so I'm sort of looking at where, like, even like fighting type, even though there's like 4 resists, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that like Thundurus, Meowstic, Starmie, or Whimsicott are like crazy bulky or anything like that. So it sort of seems like, you know, you have a strong banded fighting, it could pose problems, but then you also have to remember there is like Terra Registeel, Terra Colossal, that like, you know, these types like fighting like ground that appear to be a weakness on paper might just come around and not end up being that way inclined. And it's the same sort of thing, like any sort of type that Petron is able to switch in on, it kind of just operates as like an everything tank unless it's specifically weak to something, just through the its sheer stats. Oh, Lifelink just got posted. That's interesting. And yeah, I feel like this team has like a lot of solid options, like outside of maybe Kecleon. Yeah, maybe Meowstic has like Prankster, I guess. That's cool. There's like sort of 10 different Pokemon on this team that I feel like you could bring to a battle. And I wouldn't really be too shocked. I do think, like I said, that Megalop is quite nice for Kyurem. It sort of enables, you know, your physical Kyurem sets to just not really have to worry too much about steel types, because you've got Megalop, you've got Crocodile, you've got Z Thundurus support as well, which can sort of rip through any of those guys, you know, opposing water types as well. I think it just sort of allows for Kyurem's success to get off a scale shot and then start doing what we all fear it can do. Same sort of thing with hazard support as well. Like, if we scroll down here, there's a lot of decent stealth rock options. You also have a spike option in Colossal as well. The defoggers, I think, if it was like Thundurus I think it's better defogger than Thundurus T. I think most of the time you don't want to be running that. So Whimsicott is your only defogger, is like a little bit, maybe not amazing, but there's also 2 rapid spinners on this team as well, so I think that that's completely fine. In saying that, there might be games where you don't want rapid spin on your Starmie as well, so it's just like Karp and Bagels, I mean, they're good at prepping. It's not going to be an issue for them, but it's just something they're going to have to be cognizant of. No wish support. I think, like, even though things like Petron are self-sufficient, I think just having a wish into Petron or a wish into Registeel, it just makes them such pains in the arse. So, you know, as much as I like to see the Starmie here, if, you know, a Wisher was chosen here, maybe it would make the team like just a little bit more defensively strong. But in saying that, I prefer that they went for this option anyway. It's more fun, and it can, you know, it can generate its own momentum. And speaking of momentum, they have a lot of options. I think they're all great, and I think this is the sort of thing you want to be having, like all this momentum when you do have a Kyurem Black, when you do have a Z Thundurus T. So I think that they've, much like in Armrouge, when I commented on Connor and Cheese's Kyurem Black team, how I think that that team is very well built around Kyurem Black's success. I think this team, maybe to a slightly lesser degree, but still very similarly, has been built with Kieran Black's success in mind. It's just maybe like got a couple more standalone parts, like say your Registeel or Colossal, that sort of just like do their own thing, but it's still beneficial overall what they do. So yeah, I do like this team. I think that it will go somewhere up here. Obviously, I'll organize that in some other way for now, but right now, yeah, Karp and Bagels have the best team so far, in my opinion. Who's next? We have Eltanin next. So Eltanin, I think, has drafted like a really scary looking team. A lot of people have sort of said that they feel like Eltanin's team is like really strong. And I think just to like eyeball it here, you look at it and you're like, gods, like I do not want to deal with any of these Pokemon. And then there's like a mini Snowcore as well. So then it's similarly to when Pingu and I drafted Arctozolt. Apparently all of our opponents prepped for ages for Arctozolt and we didn't bring it a single game. So we know that this Pokemon brings a lot of time wasted with it. So yeah, that's a strong option. I do think it looks better here before you look at the type matchup chart though, which is sort of what I'm going to get into in a minute. So Eltanin made a couple trades as well. Mew for Mega Diancie, Terrakion for Slowking G, Slurpuff for Arctozolt, Claw for Vespiquen, and Mega Manectric for Volcanion. I think they're all solid trades. I do like Mega Manectric, but there was already Dragapult on the team. You could have gone really fast, but it's fine. I think Volcanion's more solid. I think Slowking G is very solid, very consistent mon. I like it. Alongside things like your Melmetal, just like, you know, it's got its Fizz Def, Slowking's got its Spidef, they just sort of bounce off each other, I think, quite nicely. And then as well, like, Claw's cool, but Vespiquen's better. You know, Mew's great, but Mega Diancie, I think, fits the theme of this team better as well. So yeah, speed tier-wise, you know, there's a gap between Bolt and Diancie, but, like, it's probably not the end of the world most of the time. I mean, I say that, but, like, you know, you look at things like Mega Lob and, you know, other base, like, 125s, where they might be able to get away with something. Maybe not base 125, maybe you need a bit more speed, but yeah. A little bit of a gap. I think the worst gap is maybe between Diancie and Articuno, especially if you consider that Articuno is typically probably outrunning max speed. Same with Volcanion. Same with Roselia. Same with type Null. You really have to get down to Arctozolt, where like the speed tier kind of matters, but then it has snow, so the speed tier doesn't matter. So then you're going down to like what, Donphan. Like if you conceptualize it like that, you've got a gap between like 350 speed and like, you know, what? Let's give Volcanion benefit of the doubt. Max speed Volcanion's 262, right? So, you know, a gap of 88 speed is like pretty substantial. I think it might cause a few issues for Eltanin. Not like major issues, but it'll just make, you know, opponents be able to do more damage or invest more in bulk, things like that. I do like this team. I think it's got a lot of strong operators. I think, you know, Melmetal, Slowking, Dragapult, Mega Diancie, they always do well. They're always really strong options in draft. Volcanion's very underrated in my opinion. It's also the Z captain, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think that'll like come too many times, but it's definitely an option that opponents have to worry about. In practice, I imagine it will be boots most of the time, but the Z is still something that, you know, could surprise an opponent. Terra captains are a mix of good and not so good in my opinion. I love Terra Articuno. I think Terra Vespiquen's fantastic too. They have shit types, but they're good Pokemon. Get rid of their type, good choice. Arctozolt, not as much. There's a couple reasons I don't like it that I probably won't get into. I still think it can be like annoying. You know, you try to deal with the Arctozolt with, I don't know, your Scarfed ground type, and then it becomes a Terra Flying type and just
destroys everything under snow. Definitely something that could happen, but yeah, I think I prefer the other two a bit more. Yeah, in terms of the typings, a little bit of concern regarding, you know, just like a lot of these types really. Especially if certain Pokemon don't come. It's sort of the opposite of where I was talking about Karp and Bagels, how, you know, their weakness to fighting and ground is sort of fake because you just tear away one of the weaknesses every game. If Eltanin tears, he's tearing into weaknesses. Like, if your ground immunity is no longer a ground immunity, that's concerning, right? You know, and there's some other prominent weaknesses, like, you know, Ghost weakness, only type Null's there to deal with it, otherwise that's pretty scary. Dark weakness, only Diancie's there to deal with it, which isn't terrible, but once you Mega, you lose a bit of that defense for the tanking purposes. So Eltanin's going to have their work cut out for them in terms of just sort of not getting eviscerated by some of these certain typings. In saying that, I do think that, you know, things like Glowking, Melmetal in some matchups are just like kind of unkillable, just neutrally. So Eltanin does have that going for them, and again, like, the team is strong overall. Hazard-wise, it's fantastic. There's so many options. I think honestly, like, if there was a wish option and that just allowed Eltanin to like play full stall or something, as much as I don't want to see it, I think that would be a great option for them. But like, I don't know who you'd like. Maybe you get rid of like type Null for I don't know, lick a tongue or something. I don't even know if that's a good idea. Heal Bell support's nice, especially for Melmetal, I like that. And then the defog options, again, like, Volcanion's an alright defogger. These guys are more lower tier, but I can see them definitely coming. Donphan's a fine option as well. So I think Hazard Control is pretty good. Momentum is not great. It's like, there's some momentum on the lower tiers, which is nice. I forget this doesn't show chilly reception as well, to be fair, so it's actually a little bit better than this is letting on. But realistically, like, Baton Pass Diancie feels a bit fake. U-turn type Null also feels a little fake, honestly. So it's sort of going to be hard to facilitate Melmetal or, like, you know, Diancie to come in, or even like a Specs Volcanion, for example. I can sort of see this team. It might end up here, depending on where I place the teams. I'm going to put it top of B for now. I do think it has some rough flaws mixed in with some really, like, good pros. Next up, I believe, is JabbatheJake. Yep. That's not right. There we go. Yeah, there's the Terror Electrode I was thinking about. This team's fast. Like, it's very quick. I like Terror Electrode. I think that's a great choice. And it's cheap as well. Like, Electrode Hisui is definitely like the better choice. But I think choosing Electrode at like, what, 3 points is it? Yeah. That's great. I think that's a great option. Sure, you're running it alongside Tapu Koko. So it's like doubling up on fast, speedy electric types that are more often than not going to be special attackers. Not the end of the world probably, and you benefit from electric terrain as Electrode, so that's cool. Terra Agron's cool. I feel like it could maybe do a thing or two. Terra Taurus Paldea Fire is also interesting. And it's probably, maybe you could have given Terra to Golbat over Aggron, but other than that, they're probably the Terra captains that you should be choosing. Z Coco is fantastic as well. Tried and true, always does its job. Yeah, and even though there's a lot of speedy guys, and there can usually be big gaps between speedy guys, I actually quite like the speed tiers here. Like, even just like the random Superior that's chucked in between Coco and Sharpedo does a lot to help the speed tiers. So I really like what
how the speed tiers have worked out there. Like when Baxcalibur as well as your like 7th or your 4th slowest Pokemon, that's generally like pretty good. Type matchups, like again, there's a couple. I feel like every team I look at in Armor Rouge or here, like Ghost is just sort of, you know, a bit scary, except for incidentally the team next door that we're going to be looking at next. By virtue of this stupid moose, whatever it is. Yeah, and you know, ground, a bit sketchy maybe, fighting, yeah, a little bit. But overall, I think typing-wise, this team's quite fine. I do think it might run into some of the same issues that I mentioned with Banjo and Sylveon, where like a lot of these Pokemon aren't bulky or self-sufficient. So Tauros is a little bit bulky, but it doesn't heal itself. You know, Golbat's alright, but susceptible to knock, obviously. Cladle's, again, alright, but not self-sufficient. There's a lot riding on Vaporeon, which I think could make this team's defensive line struggle. In saying that, like, this team isn't defensive. it's not how it's oriented. So, like, I can understand like why that might be the case. But I almost feel like instead of maybe getting a Vaporeon, then maybe just full send it, go full offense, and grab like an Alolan Ninetales instead for back support. I think that maybe could have been a good option, but you also kind of need a defensive water type in most drafts. So like, I get trying to round out this draft. It's a fair decision. I'm not really a fan of the hazard setting. I don't think Aggron and Claydol are going to be coming. Like, even if they come like 3 out of 6 matches, I don't think that's really enough for opponents to be worried about. Defog's good though. I think that even if you don't have Coco Defog because you want to have it be Z, for example, I think one of, say, like Superior, Golbat, or Claydol should come most matches, so I don't think that's too much to worry about. There's solid momentum, and I think that's really important when you are drafting something like Baxcalibur. Whether it's set up, whether it's banned, just get it in as often as possible, as freely as possible. And also haven't mentioned the Genesect here, an interesting new pick for this draft. I think that it could, like, it facilitates Baxcalibur quite well in my opinion. I think that this draft allows it to not feel too bad about not being able to run a Scarfed, just because it is, like, the draft is so fast elsewhere that, like, whether or not you could like Scarf this Genesect or not, you know, something's probably coming for these fast guys anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I think I like the idea of, you know, Technoblast Electric under electric terrain. Why not? It probably does a decent amount. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that all works out for Jabba. But I do think, like I said, that I'm worried about this team just kind of like crumbling pretty quickly due to the squishy nature of the, you know, of the Pokemon that have been drafted here. And some of these guys take time as well. Like Superior takes time to be a threat. Mega Sharpedo takes a little bit of time to become a threat. So I think outside of, say, like Coco and Genesect and maybe like a Banded Bax, the opponents aren't feeling too much pressure from the get-go, which is kind of a bit of a shame for an offensive team. I think I'll put it somewhere. I think I'll put it here for now. I think like the rationale I used for Sylveon's team sort of applies here as well, though. I think when I'm sort of rating teams a little bit lower, if your team is more offense oriented, then I think that's worth a bit more than it otherwise usually would be, just because you kind of need like an explosive team if you're going to make a, you know, quote unquote upset, which, you know, there's not really upsets, but I guess in my ranking there's, you know, inherently going to be teams that I think are more likely to win than others. So that's sort of what I mean there.
Arceus' team is next. I like this team a lot. I think a trade was made. Yeah, just Cricket Tune to Spidops, which like I think that's entirely the correct decision. Spidops does just seem like a better Cricket Tune. Maybe that's something to look into for the points next season. Maybe Cricket Tune can go to 2 or something. I don't know. Yeah, there's also a Mudkip on this team, which like that's really cool. Love that. So, you know, discounting the fact that Arceus only has like 10 Pokemon, I think that Terra Captains are really quite solid. Terra Ordino's fine. I think Arceus has even used it before, so it's something that's familiar to them. And as someone who just bought the Terra Regidrago and spent a long time thinking about how to prep for it, that thing is a pain in the ass. So I think that's a really good Terra choice. Makes great use of Terra Blast. It can be physical, it can be special, it can be choiced, it can be set up. Absolute pain. So good choices there. On the flip side, I never used to like Fezandipity in general. I've sort of been converted. I think it's alright now. I'm not massively convinced about its capacity as a Z captain. But in saying that, unless you really want to heavily invest in Mismatches, which I don't think you should, when you have a Fezandipity option, I guess, I think it's the best Sea Captain that was available to Arceus, so fair enough. And like, it'll catch people off guard. Fezandipity's move pool is quite like, it's got a lot of weird and just different moves, so I can see it sort of pulling out like a random kill that then facilitates the rest of the game to work around. Work around other threats. Speed tiers are quite decent. There's a lot of sort of like really fast guys, so like even Tornadus T, who would usually be like one of the fastest guys drafted, kind of feels a little bit, you know, on the slower end when you're comparing like, you know, you got all these teams with their fast electric types, their Jolteons, their Electrodes, you know, Megazams around now, things like that. But it's still like a fantastic pick overall. I think it pairs really well with Ogerpon as well. I do like the Ogerpon plus Tornadus pairing. Like Tornadus can deal with bulky grass types for the Ogerpon. Excuse me. You know, Ogerpon deals well with like rock types for Tornadus, for example. Other typings, like it's, you know, it can do alright into as well. That Torn would either just hit like neutrally or whatever. Both with pivot options too, I think is quite solid, and both quite scary to deal with. Fezandipity I kind of mentioned already. It's an interesting Pokemon. I don't really know how to talk about it. But I think having that grounded poison option is quite nice. I think Fairy Poison's a pretty solid type in general to have. You know, it gives you your Fairy Resist. It just in general is a bulky mon as well, for def-wise, which I think this team quite likes. It's just really hard to be a special attacker into this team when you consider that, you know, Ordino as well, make this Sizzle, and then Tinglu, I swear it gets better every single draft I see it in. That guy's just a pain in the ass. It just doesn't ever die. And I do really think that Arceus has sort of constructed a really strong team that just like opponents are going to struggle to break through. Not to say that it's like a stall team or anything like that. It's quite balanced, but I think that if Arceus needs to slow games down, Arceus can slow games down very easily, a lot better than their opponent. In most scenarios, I would imagine. You know, would a higher tier Wisher maybe have been better than having Ordino? Sure, but like Ordino is definitely more than serviceable. Like it does completely fine for that role, and I don't even think like it was wishing in the one game I saw from Arceus. It was like clicking a return, beating up a Zebstrika or something. Yeah, overall I like this team quite a lot. It even has a Rotom on it, just for extra support. Rotoms are always good. You know, you've got a Grass, Water, Fire core with just Rotom and Ogerpon, which covers a lot of shit. You've got a strong Dark type, which I think is quite important too. You know, Dragon Fairy Steel as well. If we just keep naming buzzword cores, you know, you've got that with your Mega Scizor, Regidrago, and your Fezandipity too. So I think there's just a lot of strong backbone to this team, but it's still got a lot of strong offensive options as well. And even the tanks can like start setupping sweeping, you know. We don't need an introduction to what Mega Scizor can do. You know, Nasty Plot Rotom is a thing that could exist. Calm Mind, Fezandipity maybe, you know, Swords Dance Ogerpon. I know that's not a defensive guy, but like you've got a lot of setup options available, which makes this team always threatening, even if it does just seem like someone's coming in as a defensive switch in. Hazards are fantastic. I mean, when you've got Tinglu and Spidops, if Arceus wants hazards to be present in a game, there will be hazards in a game. That's just how it's going to go. Sneaky Spikes option as well on Ogerpon's always appreciated. And then I think I said someone else had like the strongest like trio of defoggers or something, but looking at this team, yeah, this is an impeccable lineup. I don't think you could really draft much better in terms of removal, outside of like I guess having a spinner for the sake of having a spinner. But yeah, momentum's great as well. You know, 6 unique momentum moves here. Realistically, you could see, excluding maybe Spidops, like I think it's quite likely that these 5 will be present in more than just one game, maybe like 2 or 3 games at a time. With, you know, you pair all that momentum with say like Regidrago, or even if you go more defensive with like, you know, 4 of those momentum guys plus Tinglu plus Regidrago, I think that's really threatening. Opponents are going to really have to look out for that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think this team's great. I think it's my personal favorite team. You know, excluding my own, because I'm extremely biased, obviously. But even then, like when I'm rating my own team, I think it has like perhaps more readily available like flaws that you can see compared to Arceus' team. Like it seems very well constructed. Last 2 teams now. We got Toph's team. So this is being recorded after the 191 turn battle. I think that sort of made me like, it's made me both rate this team higher, but also rate this team a little bit lower. So it's probably net neutral overall. Because obviously if you're playing a game for 191 turns, the team is probably at least a little bit better than you originally expected. But in saying that, we also had a lot of time to ruminate on, oh, there were a lot of things that perhaps we could have brought instead that would have made our lives a lot easier. So to start with, I think I'll just mention the speed tiers. Like this team is slow. You know, Kivs and Lucas got criticized for having a top speed of 110 in like season 6 or something like that. So, you know, it's precedent. I have to mention it. This team is quite slow. It has webs, which is cool. Does help. So I will say that does circumvent things a little bit. The speed gap between Latios and Tusk, if webs don't come though, is pretty major. So that's going to be a little bit tricky maybe for Toph to navigate. Other than that, like, you know, you've got some base 75s or whatever. There's trick room capabilities, like it, you know, I think that side of things is good, like the slower end. I just worry for the speedy end. In terms of Z captains, I love Z Heatran. That could always have been an option. Z Tusk is really annoying to deal with as well though. I didn't originally rate it like a couple seasons ago, but I think just like even having to prep for it is just a pain. Like there's a lot of stupid calcs you have to do off some random coverage move that Tusk really shouldn't get, but it does. Z Latios was also a completely viable option too, so I think that like, I can't say that Toph made a bad decision. There were 3 good decisions. He made a good decision. Terra-wise, I think the Terra captains are quite strong as well. Like we've already seen Terra Phalanx sweep someone. Terra Rotom of any variety is always decent. And then Ceruledge, I think, is quite solid as well after it sat in front of me for like 130 turns. In saying that, I did originally, like for some reason when I was prepping for it, I thought Regice got like Freeze Dry and Carmine and shit. I thought it was a lot better than it is. But then if we only had that kind of demon at 3 points, you'd probably have to really question what the hell we were doing in our tiering. I think, I mean, yeah, I'll scroll down here. As we've seen, like Toph's defensive core is quite strong. I do think it suffers from a lack of a dark type. Blissey sort of acts as the ghost check, but it's not always reliable, you know, and if the ghost brings something, you know, ghosts get all kind of weird, like status moves or trapping or shit like that, you know, taunt, etc. Also can't be hit by seismic toss, Blissey's main move. So it sort of makes ghosts quite scary for Toph. Ghosts should probably be scary for everyone, as I keep saying. I kind of like the idea between like having like Blissey, big Spadef guy, and Slowbro, big defense guy. We've seen like Sarah draft Blissey plus Summers into Crown in the past, which seemed very, very strong. So it's the same sort of vibe, though I don't know if I rate Mega Slowbro like too highly. It kind of just sits there most of the time. But it can definitely do some things. It can tank some hits, and it can take, like, it doesn't, because of the existence of Blissey, it can just Mega Evolve kind of freely. It doesn't have to sit around and regenerate for a bit and just sort of be unsure whether or not it's wise to Mega. Offensively, this team is pretty strong as well. I think Ladio's Great Tusk and Heatran are just three fantastic options. In saying that, not like Ladio's always going to be aggressive, but Tusk and Heatran, like they'll probably often be forced into like more defensive kind of builds, so it might neuter this team's offenses a little bit. And if they're not if they're not more defensive, then that's again where you might see, you know, Fairy become an issue, or Rock become an issue, or, you know, Flying types, you know, things like that, depending on, you know, which Pokemon come and whatnot. Overall, I do like that Toph has like 11 good Pokemon. Like even Kingler's fine. It's maybe like, no, honestly, it's fine. So I like that. It makes prep difficult for Toph. I like prepping for him difficult. Hazards are solid. Removal solid as well. I think that, you know, running remove, even if you're forced to run removal on Tusk, you're never upset about that. Momentum's quite good too. You know, you could use maybe like a little bit more, but like, what are you going to do? Heatran and Tusk don't have momentum, so like, you know, that's life. Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is that, yeah, there's a few insights that I've had since playing Toph where I feel like the team's maybe a little bit more susceptible to certain things, which does sort of bring it down for me a little bit. And I think that, you know, say if like one piece of the defensive core breaks, then Toph's kind of just left with like a Blissey. If he brings it to the match, he's kind of left with like a Blissey that's just sort of, it's wishing, but no one really benefits too much, or like it could be predicted, or it just forces like a difficult sort of scenario where, like, you know, if one guy gets downed, or essentially if Blissey goes down instead, then, you know, things like Regice, things like Mega Bros suddenly kind of fall apart a bit because they have no way of sustaining themselves. But yeah, the team has options. It can be aggressive. It's got Galvantula too for webs. So if Toph wants to go down that route, then definitely he can. So I think just based on that, it's definitely going into B tier. I think I might prefer... I'm gonna have to come back and reevaluate between Me2 and Toast team, or Me2 and Pink and Toast team. I think I value Eltanin's team a little bit higher though. Just at the present. All right, and then lastly, oh, and I forgot to mention as well, Toph did make some trades. Originally having a Tapu Fini. Which, I mean, if you could just chuck a 12th man Tapu Fini on this team, it would go completely bonkers, but thankfully that's illegal. Toph also grabbed an Omastar and a Klinklang and then traded them away an hour and 32 minutes later, so rest in peace those guys. But yeah, I think overall, like, the trades didn't really, like, it altered the team very slightly, not nearly as much as some of the other trades we saw. Yeah, and then lastly we have Destructiboy's team. Incidentally, I've not really looked at Destructiboy's team too much compared to some of the others, just because he's not on Pingu and I's schedule. So that sort of eliminates 2/3 of the teams already. I do like it though. I think it seems quite just solid overall. No trades for Destructiboy. Speed tiers are like, they're like nice to look at. I think 150 into 126 into 119 just looks nice. I don't know why. But yeah, there's no gaps in these top four. Like a bit of a gap between Treads and Glamora, but end of the day, it's not too substantial. Terra captains I think are great. I think Terra Electro Hisui is one of the biggest beneficiaries of Terra Blast being legal. I think DB will be able to use that to great effect this season. And I think Talonflame is also a bit underrated. I think being able to terrestrialize that into some sort of, defensive type. People often use Talonflame when it's been drafted in this league for defensive purposes, which kind of makes its fire flying type a little bit sad. And look, its defensive stats aren't like insane, but it has a good supportive move pool with things like Tailwind and Wisp and U-turn and Defog, etc., etc. So I think being able to tear away from a shitty typing into, a fairy or a water type or whatever you kind of want is really strong. And not to mention as well, like you can go a classic sort of sweeping Talonflame with Sword Stance, Terra into a defensive typing and set up more, or get value out of a Terra Blast typing and take out some threats that you otherwise wouldn't be able to deal with like a Terra Ground or a Terra Ice. So I like those two captains. I think Z Primarina is just like okay. But like realistically, what else would you have chosen? Like you could choose Glamora or Treads, I guess. But I think that Z Prima of the options that DB had available is it's a fair thing to choose here. I also like the mini Snowcall, just like a random bear tick to go. Like Slowking was probably picked. Yeah, 4th pick. DB probably just wanted the Slowking because it's a Slowking, right? And then later down the line was like, you know what, I can pick a bear tick here, which I think it's great. I think mini like Snowcalls or mini Sandcalls are just like nice to have. They can really throw opponents off. It's just like another random annoying low pointer that you have to prep for. In saying that, I don't really feel like Piloswine was necessary along that. Just because you already have a physical ground and a physical ice type. Maybe like the 7 points could have gone to something else. But Piloswine does actually do a lot of damage. It can be quite strong in its own right, so like I get it, I understand it. But yeah. Yeah, defensively, this team looks alright. Like as in like type-wise, I mean. Like again, shocker, Ghost is a concern. Rock a little bit as well, and I think Treads being sort of your only rock resist is a bit concerning, just because a lot of these rock types or things with rock coverage tend to run Earthquake as well, which could make DB's life a little bit tricky. As well as some other sort of like types where, you know, say like Flying, Treads is again doing most of the heavy lifting there. But like defensively, the team, it's alright bulk-wise. I think Slowking does like a lot of heavy lifting there. I think as well there's just a bit of anti-synergy with the fact that you have Primarina, who's, you know, a bulky water who mainly focuses on Spadef, and then you have Slowking, who's a bulky water who mainly focuses on Spadef. Kind of like what I was talking about, how you might not have needed Piloswine with sort of the ground and the ice already. I think there's just a bit of overlap, even though these Pokemon do different things. But typically I would say if something can beat Primarina, it can probably beat Slowking as well, which might make things a bit difficult for DB. I'd say offensively though, this team is quite solid. Like there's a good mix, I think, though, of like some bulky guys, some solid hazards that we can see down here. Like any team that has a Glamora can, you know, play the hazard game. Maybe slightly light on the removal, but like Iron Treads is probably always running spin, so like it's fine. And then yeah, some offensive threats as well, like mentioned Electrode, but also Roaring Moon's extremely solid, in my opinion. I think it's great with or without Sun. Treads is an alright offensive option, and then you've got also Mega Heracross, which is obviously extremely strong as a wall breaker. So the team doesn't really like lack for power. Like you could maybe make the argument that the Spatax like side of things is a fair bit lower, like you can sort of see from these averages as well, which might be a bit of a concern, you know. I don't think that's too like outlandish to say, but like in my opinion, this team has a decent amount going for it. Like it's just solid. Like everything you kind of have to prep for, everything like can hit you decently hard, everything sort of can pivot to a more like supportive or defensive playstyle as well. So DB sort of got himself a team where there's a lot of different options in my opinion, and I think that's quite solid. And there's no like sort of like key player that like, you know, say on other teams where like if one Pokemon goes down, one specific mon, then like maybe the game plan falls apart. On this team I don't really feel that. Like maybe if like Roaring Moon goes down early, like you're pretty sad, but I don't think that it's gonna be extremely like just game ending instantly if something were to go wrong. So yeah, I kind of do like that for all of that, and again there's, you know, good momentum, things like that. There's solid setup. I mean, Roaring Moon's always a pain in the ass setup wise. You've got Z Prim that can make use of Calm Mind plus Z. So yeah, a lot of good options on that front. I think that I feel like these two teams are a little bit of a cut above the ones here, so I will separate it, even though it like kind of looks a little bit wonky. Just because I feel like DB's team is more solid perhaps than like the ones here, but I don't know if I would say it's like right next to Karp and Bagel's team, if that makes sense. As for, I think the only one where I was going to look back at sort of the teams before going into my own team, where I'm going to get the opinions of a couple other people to sort of rate it, and then talk a little bit about the pros and cons that they identify, as well as some pros and cons that I've identified with my own team. Yeah, I guess with Me2 and Pinks, it's sort of like, as I said, damage profile worries me a little bit. With Toph, it's like overall more bulky.
I feel like I might keep it as is, though I wouldn't be shocked if, like, you know, people had this or people had this maybe. I think this is like within the B tiers is quite contentious. I think like, you know, around here is also quite contentious. You could definitely make an argument for any way of sort of ordering around these teams, and I'd probably just be like, yeah, you know what, that's fair enough. No issues whatsoever. But yeah, apart from my own team, like I said, I think this is sort of my final ratings for Ceruledge. So I guess if you don't want to hear me just start yapping about my own team, then yeah, feel free to leave it here. But yeah, I think a lot of the teams that I've come across at both Ceruledge and Arceus are quite solid. And even the ones where I'm like ranking them a bit lower seem to be more geared towards like an offensive play style, which maybe that just is sort of, you know, maybe that just shows my bias in rankings. Maybe I really appreciate, you know, strong defense when ranking these teams, or I think it's necessary more than maybe it is. But I don't think there's a single team that I've come across that I just am looking at and just like, yeah, it's flawed and has no comeback potential. Like I think everything feels like it has some sort of comeback potential. So yeah, anyways, for my own team now. Alrighty, now for Pingu and I's team, I've gotten the opinions of both T and Toph to provide just some pros and cons that they feel about our team, as well as just like a general placement of where they might put the team. That way, I'm not just going to be talking about my team super biasedly and then saying, yeah, it's the best, it's S tier, whatever. Just using this super old logo from a couple of seasons past for that as well, even though we don't have, well, I guess we do actually have Lando on our team again, so there you go. So I've just pulled up the prep doc. This is just Pingu and I's personal one because it doesn't actually, there's one team too many for all teams from Arceus and Ceruledge to fit on one doc, so this is just our prep doc. Our team on the left hand side, of course. So starting with the pros, I think a lot of people sort of point towards Mega Alakazam sitting there up front and center. A lot of people wanted this pick. Pingu and I were really happy that we were able to get it. And it has, in the couple of games that we've had the opportunity to use it thus far, it has just felt like a really good, I guess, insurance policy. Just really strong, obviously, but like that speed stat is so hard to deal with. And that's something that Toph has especially highlighted. Both Toph and T have said that, you know, there's quite a solid top end, you know, all sort of filled with threatening Pokemon. Personally, I was quite happy with sort of these first 3 picks, and then trying to sort of get everything else later down the line, maybe except for like,
If you find dark chocolate a
fuck's
little
sake.
bitter or overpowering, discover Lind Excellent.
Let's fix that. So something that Toph and T have both pointed out is sort of the just the scary nature of our top end. So I guess when you look at our first 3 picks, they're all very strong in their own rights, and I think they work quite nicely together. Meowscarada and Lando both being able to pivot whenever they want, or provide hazards whenever they want for things like Alakazam to be allowed to sweep or clean up. And sort of going down the line there, sort of outside of maybe like Pangoro and you could maybe argue Magnezone, a lot of the rest of these guys are sort of just facilitators for the top 3. Still strong in their own rights, but it's these like higher end guys that can cause a lot of issues for opponents. Let's just fix that up. Alright. And then another thing that was mentioned as well, sorry, is just going off of that last point, is just the level of momentum. So it sort of allows our team to have a strong offensive profile. I mean, you look sort of at all our options here. There's U-turn, there's Volt Switch, there's Flip Turn, there's Parting Shot, there's Teleport. There's just pretty much everyone on this team, outside of, I suppose, like Rhydon, has some sort of, and, you know, we're probably not
pivoting on Zam either. But outside of those guys, it's like everyone kind of pivots on this team, which I think is really valuable in drafts. Like people, you know, a lot of the time when especially when you're not sure what the opponent's bringing, you want to go to your safe switches or whatever. So just having that momentum option is something that Pingu and I always sort of strive for when drafting. So I guess if you go back and look at a bunch of our teams in the past, you'll see that, yeah, there's always a lot of momentum on them. T highlighted as well that there's a strong defensive backline, or backbone rather. So, you know, things like Dragagi, things like Slowbro, even like, you know, the occasional Magnezone, the occasional Rhydon, and of course Landorus as well. They can all sort of come together and deal with most types. As T has highlighted, most types, but there is a bit of a weakness on this team to Ice. And Toph especially highlighting there that, you know, one of our Ice resistances, Magnezone, is the Terra Captain as well, which does feel a bit dodgy. Something that I guess we weren't really drafting or keeping in mind when drafting, but looking back at it now, we would have probably liked to have gotten something else that can cover Ice, which can admittedly, you know, be difficult sometimes. And the same sort of argument can be said for flying as well, you know, Fairy potentially as well, depending on the matchup. It's not like there's not answers, but it's definitely, like I've mentioned for other people's PRs, it's something that's going to be necessary to keep in mind. On top of that, just going back to sort of like the cons there a little bit, they both highlighted that there is quite a decent gap between Lando and Meowscarada. I honestly didn't even realize until they pointed it out. I think I sort of got baited by the fact there's a Furfrou here, which is probably not the most real speed tier of all time. All things considered, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but it's definitely a notable gap that other people could most likely exploit. Our hazard options, I know I touched on them before, but there's a solid amount of hazard options. Like, we have all the hazards available. We don't have like an overabundance of, say, rockers or things like that, but there's definitely the option to bring hazards pretty comfortably every game, which Toph has definitely highlighted in what he had to say. And then both T and Toph also mentioned that they liked the Terra Captains and the Z Captains, with Zone particularly standing out as, you know, one of the potentially strongest Terra Captains that are on offer currently, as a 10-point Terra Blaster. And then Landorus as well has always been just a massive annoyance in prep and often in battle with the Z Crystal too. Did they mention other things? Just a couple like duplicate types that we might have on, you know, certain archetypes. So I think that perhaps, like, you know, if you're considering like both our ground types are possibly better into like physical mons than they are special mons, just little things like that, you know, might come in and hurt the team a little bit. Outside of that, I don't think there's like too much to say. I think that looking at our team, I mean, especially after the 191 turn battle, you can definitely see that our team could be played defensively when required, but also looking at the top end and things like Z-Lando and just the different threats that maybe Magnezone might pose to certain teams, or Pangoro perhaps. This team is able to be piloted to sort of open up holes in other people's teams and, you know, maybe get a sweep off with some sort of setup lander or something akin to that. When asked to like rate the team, I didn't mention to Toph or T what my ratings were, so they were sort of just going in blind based on what they think, not trying to conform to the tier list that I've posed here. T mentioned putting our team in sort of that 2 to 4 range, and Toph mentioned saying in that 2nd or 3rd range, and I feel like so excuse me, I feel like it probably sits comfortably here. You know, maybe T might make arguments that it's here, or Toph might say that no, actually it's here. Personally, I feel like it sits somewhere around here in obviously my own biased opinion. I mean, in my own biased opinion, I'd probably put it here, right? But like, I can also identify that, yeah, there's definitely flaws, like things that I've called other people out for, such as like the typing chart, you know, certain types being pretty decent into Pingu and I's team. But overall, I mean, as the person who drafted, I'm quite happy with what we've put together, and it seems like from the couple of people I've asked for opinions on, from rather, they seem to agree that the team is pretty decently put together, and you know, stands quite solidly within this, you know, upper echelon of the Ceruledge bracket. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is now my final little bit for the Ceruledge draft. This is sort of how those rankings would look. Again, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if you know, the standings don't naturally conform to how I've sort of conceptualized things here. But just looking at the teams from a, you know, from a third person point of view, trying to rate them on their strengths and weaknesses, personally, I feel like this is a decent evaluation of what's been drafted, you know, this time around. I think I'm probably a little bit more comfortable with where I've put Ceruledge than maybe Armrouge. I think Armrouge, there's a couple things that, you know, I might look at later and think to myself, yeah, I got that a bit wrong. But yeah, hopefully, you know, this whole process of doing the PRs has been insightful in ways that, you know, the write-ups haven't been in the past, maybe. Happy to see what people think of this, and yeah, hope you enjoyed.